Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Wednesday Instagram Live broadcast. I'm Jason Haas, as always. I am very much looking forward to my guest today. I'll have Chris Taranto, who is the communications director for the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance, joining me. But as I typically do, I want to start out by sharing a few pictures and a few stories about what is going on at the vineyard right now. So let me give you a sense of what things look like here. So first of all, it is exceptionally green. That is, I think we're kind of at peak greenness after some rain last week, some rain the week before, and then the extra sun you get from being in March. It's really quite remarkable, beautiful. We are at the very end stages of being able to have our sheep in the vineyard. The cover crop is pretty spectacular. You can see this is some mustard up near the top of the vineyard. You can see, I don't know, here's one of Sadie romping in that cover crop. It really is super green and lush. But what we're trying to do now is get our animals one last pass through the vineyard to give them a little more fertilization. We're going to have to pull them out of the vineyard once we get bud break, and bud break is fairly imminent. I'll show you the closest I got to finding actual bud break in the vineyard was buds that looked like that, kind of woolly and swelling and starting to turn color, but no leaves yet. So I think we're only a few days out, and that will mean that we will have to get the sheep out of the early sprouting varieties. This one's Viognier, by the way. Into the later sprouting varieties where we've got probably another 3 or 4 weeks before we get to bud break. For example, this is Counoise. You can see those buds are still, they look just the same as they did in January. At the same time, we are trying to start to get at least the area underneath the vine rows back turned under so that we don't have weeds growing in amongst the vines, and so that we don't have as much water competition for the vines, since we're unlikely to get much more rain. So our main tool for doing this is a tractor attachment called the tournesol. It drags along back behind a tractor and kind of cultivates underneath the vine rows without uprooting the vines. I have a close-up of that too. You can see that it's called tournesol, which is the French word for sunflower, because the head of the cultivating blade looks kind of like a sunflower head. So you can see it cultivating among the vines, and you can see what it will look like when we're done. I got a picture of a section that we had already completed. So you can see there's still grass growing in the middle of the rows, but we've managed to turn the grass underneath the vines. In the cellar, we've been working on blending. That is the subject of my blog this week. So if you missed it, you can go in, you can see all of my tasting notes, talk a little bit about what we found with the 2020 whites. Overall, super interesting vintage and really kind of encouraging. We didn't see any signs of any smoke issues. We were super happy with the wines that we ended up putting together. So if you want to know about how we do that, again, check out the blog. And then in terms of what's going on in the tasting room, we are open outside, and it is wine club shipment week. So we've sent out, 7,000 wine club shipments or something this week, and people are coming here to pick them up. We're offering the wines in the shipment as a tasting flight, and we have our virtual pickup party coming up on April 16th. So if that sounds like something fun, check it out. There's details on our website. Okay, cool. That's it. I'm going to stop sharing. And now I'm going to invite Chris to join me. He's joining from the Paso Wine account. So I see him watching. So hopefully we'll get him on here momentarily. Hey.
Hey, Jason.
How are you, Chris?
Good. It's the first time I've ever done this Instagram thing. This is pretty slick.
Well, it is amazing technology, and it is. They've made big improvements to it just since we've all been in quarantine. I think because they've had so much demand for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We got started with the Zoom thing back in April, and back then I felt a little clunky on it. And now, I'm like all over the place, like, oh, let me just do that and this and that. And it's like, yeah, all right, right on. Thanks for
I mean,
having
just
me.
the power of the tools that we have available to us now is amazing. I mean, I can't imagine what we all would have done if it had been a decade ago that we'd had this pandemic and still were supposed to be connecting with our customers and writers and uh, trade, and it would have been a very different world.
Absolutely. My kids and I oftentimes kid about how, now we're so able to do this and it comes so naturally to us. And we watch a lot of Star Trek at home. And so it's like, we have our little flip quarters. We have, all of that same technology now is beginning and starting at our fingertips.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the future is now in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'd love to start just by having you tell people how you got into wine. I mean, I love that there's another New Englander, another Red Sox fan out here to keep me company, but that can't be a normal career path from Boston.
I do. Sitting here at my desk, I have my Manny. Yeah, as a kid, I grew up. I'm a first generation American and was born in Boston. And as a kid growing up in this Italian immigrant family, along with a Central American immigrant family, we were like this interesting mix of my dad's side and my mom's side. But on my dad's side, a lot of these Italian uncles who wanted to continue their traditions, and so they would ship grapes out from, I think it was Lodi, and it was typically either Barbera or Zinfandel, and this is in the 70s. And they would crush in their cellars and their basements and make some interesting wine. And as kids, we would go over and big family dinners, and at the end of dinner, all the kids would get a little brandy glass of the home wine mixture that either Uncle Enzo or Uncle John made. and by the end of the night, all the kids are out in the TV room. The parents are all playing pinochle or whatever, and having a good old time. And then all of a sudden you're being stuffed in a snowsuit and thrown in the back of a car, no seatbelts or anything, and making your way home. And that's almost like my first kind of experiences around wine, but oftentimes being in those cellars though of my uncles, and that smell, that musty smell that you kind of don't want to smell now that I know. But it was so intriguing, and I think that was really where my first kind of thoughts of wine and that whole lifestyle came to be.
Cool. Yeah, I have good friends who live in South Philly, in an old Italian neighborhood. And it's funny, I went over to their house and they're like, you got to check out what's in the basement. And I'm like, really? So we walked down to the basement and there's like a built-in wine press that's a part of the wall there, because there was all the same things. Like the grapes would come out from the Midwest or from California on train cars, refrigerated train cars. And like the whole neighborhood would be fermenting their own wine in their own cellars.
Yeah. Sounds very familiar. That's fun.
So, how did you go from that starting point to the Central Coast of California?
Yeah, so into the business of wine. I mean, my family ended up moving to Southern California, and so I quickly became a Californian, and went to school up north in Sacramento. And at the time, wine was still part of my family's dinner table and everything. So when I would visit and all of that, and it became part of mine too. It was one of the only college kids who wasn't looking at scoring beer, but rather finding something kind of decent to drink with dinner.
Been there.
And then it kind of turned into the thought like, oh, okay, well, I'm a surfer and I love wine. I'm going to apply for jobs. And I was a recreation administration major. I'm going to apply for jobs in the tourism industry that will take me to the coast and into a wine country. And that brought me ultimately to Monterey. And so I spent many years there getting to know wine, getting to know the Central Coast, if you will, and which spent about 10 years up there in the tourism industry, found a way to get down to Paso, because at the time I knew this is about 2002, found a way to get to Paso because I knew it was this burgeoning wine country, and found myself the ED of the what used to be the Paso Robles Visitors and Conference Bureau.
Yep. I think that was where I first met you, was when you were doing that.
Exactly. I was just going to say that's when we first met, and I think you may have maybe just come to the Central Coast right around that time too. Isn't that
Yep.
right?
02. 02.
Yep.
Same here.
And so from there, did that for a little while until funding got wonky on that organization. Actually found myself in the space industry for a little while. I was commuting down to Santa Maria, working for the California Space Authority as their PR person. And a really great opportunity came about. The former executive director of the Wine Alliance, Stacy Jacob, called me up and said, "Hey, I've got this new job I'm creating at the Wine Alliance. Would you be interested in applying for it?" I applied, and here I am 14 years later.
14 years and 3 executive directors later.
That's right.
Cool. So as communications director, what's your elevator pitch for what you do when people ask?
Yeah. So I am basically kind of like, if you will, the spokesperson for the Paso Robles wine region, and when speaking to trade and media, and helping to educate them on what makes the Paso Robles wine region unique.
Cool. And so so I guess let's talk about kind of pre-COVID. So what does that mean in terms of practical terms? What sorts of programs are you putting together? How are you telling the story of Paso Robles wine?
So much of what it is that we do here, and I'll say, Jason, up until recently, he was one of our board members, and so I know you know the right questions to ask here. But we basically would entertain or bring in influencers, if you will, but not the influencers that are on Instagram or TikTok and stuff, but rather people that have an audience. So wine writers, travel writers, food writers, those types of lifestyle writers who actually have outlets. We would bring them into Paso and do these kind of immersive experiences where we would tour them around Paso. We would have them meet people like yourself, Jason, and go through and there's always that whole connection of doing the what is it, the grafting of the vines, and they would walk away going, wow, I have my own little vine that, so those kinds of experiences, going out to dinner, walking through vineyards, tasting with interesting people, and really helping them to connect with our region and who we are, not only from the dirt and ground and climate standpoint, but as people. And then we would do the same thing though with trade, in bringing in buyers, bringing in sommeliers and those types of influencers, those people that influence a wine list or a store shelf, and have them come and go through a very similar experience, but oftentimes it would be a little bit more on the technical side versus the lifestyle side. So that way they can get a better grasp of who we are as a wine region and what makes us unique and stand out from other places.
And I remember we did a consumer perception survey a couple of years ago, and one of the results that really jumped out to me was the super high percentage of consumers whose first exposure to Paso Robles wine was on a shelf or on a wine list where they live. It wasn't people coming here. It was that they bought a bottle of J. Lore, they bought a bottle of Hope Family, or they bought a bottle of one of the wineries that has decent distribution in their neighborhood retailer or neighborhood restaurant.
Yeah, that was a really interesting study, because I think that really brought to light though how important some of those brands are to who we are and those first impressions, and how good that was actually for an industry as a whole to be able to find some quality wines out there that we can say represent us well. But then when they come here, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, there's so much more, Yeah,
that's one of the things that I've always thought is a real advantage for Paso as a region, is that we have wineries of all different sizes and profiles, and yet everybody's kind of on the same, they're all on board together. I mean, you see the big wineries and the little wineries all serving on the board, all participating in events, all kind of all shoulders on the wheel together. And I don't think that that's necessarily the same in your average wine region.
No, and that's always, interestingly enough, one of the things that when we do our exit surveys, if you will, with whether it be journalists or trade, one of the things that always rises to the top is the camaraderie of this region, and how much everybody is able to lean on one another and not find competition with your neighbor, but rather find a lot of commonalities that help elevate the region as a whole.
Yeah. And that's always, like, people ask me fairly often. I feel like when I talk to writers, they're like, so who do you think your competition is? It's like, I don't really think about things that way. Like, I'm much more likely to work collaboratively with either our neighbors geographically or our fellow travelers in the Rhone category, because it's not like somebody who buys a bottle of Halter Ranch across the street is less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek, or somebody who buys a bottle of whatever, Santa Barbara County Rhone blend is less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek. They're in both cases more likely. So, like, the more things that we can do as a winery to help the categories that we're a part of grow, and Paso is a huge piece of that, like, the better off we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it very evident when we go out into market, and I know you've been a part of this too, is when, say, we're in New York or Chicago or something, and we're putting together one of those master classes or just experiences that we do. And oftentimes how the commentary afterward is following is how by us working together, we are really helping the category of Paso versus, and it isn't versus, as you were saying, but versus, say, Napa or Sonoma, and how maybe the perception is different from when those regions come into market.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that was pre-COVID. So talk about how, I mean, obviously a lot of those avenues, people coming here isn't as easy. Us going on the road to do like big events, that's not practical at all. So how have you had to pivot for that messaging in COVID times?
Yeah, so being able to continue that relation, because wine, of course, I mean, I've said this, I feel like ad nauseum, but I'll say it again, is wine is such a relationship kind of industry. It's very personal, you know, it's the only thing where you're actually literally putting the product in somebody's mouth to try to get them to appreciate and hopefully purchase it, right? And so by not being able to do that in person, whether in market or here, we had to do something different, and we turned to this medium here. We turned to Zoom, and for us, for Paso Wine, whether it was directly to the consumer or even to the trade or the journalist, we had to find a way to still make a connection with them. And this is very, you know, this is one dimensional in a sense. You know, we can't touch, we can't hear, or you know, be in person and have that kind of personal interaction, but we can taste together. And I think that's where wineries found it too, is like, well, at least we're activating a few of our senses, but one of the most important ones is the taste sense. And by being able to still do that in this manner, we've seen that we're still making that connection. And maybe that's just unique to wine, or you know, I don't know if the almond board is doing something like that too or whatever, but at least we're able to continue that in a sense. And plus, you know, this has given a lot of people really cool access in a way that maybe you couldn't if you came to town, because we're in the middle of crush, or, you know, a winemaker or yourself is off traveling and you're not at the winery able to, you know, actually interact with somebody. And so this has given this little window an opportunity to continue that bit of interaction. And so that's what we did. So we created the Paso Wine Hour. That's something that I do every Thursday on Zoom. And it's mirrored to our Facebook page at Paso Robles Wine, where I interview winemakers and personalities of our region. We talk about a topic, we share some wine, we hang out, and you know, kind of just talk about anything really. So we've done that. We've also created Where Wine Takes You. It's a podcast. That thing is immensely popular right now, and that's where we pair a couple of winemakers or personalities in town to talk to Adam Montiel, a radio personality here, and he interviews them and gets their story, because that's, again, what this is. This is, you know, story. This is getting that backstory and understanding where wine comes from and that whole sense of place. So those are some of the things that we've done to help continue along in this relationship that we have with whatever audience it may be.
I love the podcast was fun. I was on one of the earlier episodes. and Adam is obviously always a great and engaging person to talk to. But it was cool. It was really cool to see how that worked. I got paired up with Julian Aseo, the chef owner at Le Petit Canaille, which again, there's kind of like that French-American partnership thread that goes between what he does and what we do here at Tablas Creek. And it was cool that the way that Adam kind of made those connections.
Yeah, that's great. And that's that's why we tapped him for that too, is he's been doing, that Cork Dork show. And so I think he's really kind of become adept at finding those interesting stories from a wine country lifestyle standpoint, to really help everyone interact and basically have a really cool show.
And the other thing that I like that you mentioned is that idea of access, because I think you're right that one of the things that people have gotten out of these COVID times is the direct connections with owners and winemakers. I mean, I don't know the number of people who've seen the inside of my living room over the last year, but it is way higher than the number in any normal year before that. So it is in some ways. I mean, it's not necessary. I think people think of it as these sort of digital, electronic conversations as inferior to in-person conversations. And I'm not sure that that's accurate. I think in some ways they're just different. There's some things that they actually do better than what you could do in person.
Absolutely. And this is here to stay too. I just did I think it was it Unified? I've been doing a few of these things lately. And one of the assertions that we've had across the board is that this isn't going away. Just because we all get to come back and travel again and do all those things, that this is going to continue in a way because of that ability to have access, but also back to how we first started talking. I mean, it's the future. This is where we are. And I think it's a really great tool now that everybody out there, if you're a winery or whatever business you are for that matter, part of your strategies and marketing should be obviously a website, obviously social media, and obviously some sort of a link like this, whether it be Zoom or Instagram or whatever, that will help you continue to connect with whoever it is that your audience is.
For sure. Yeah, I had a conversation with Elaine Chacon Brown earlier this year, where we were talking about some of the ways in which your normal kind of seminar or trade event is inherently inefficient. I mean, it's really hard to get the people who you want to present all in the same spot with an audience that wants to listen to that. I mean, that's really hard. And with these electronic tools, I mean, it doesn't matter where you are. You can get, in many cases, a better audience. You can get a group of rock star panelists, and they can be sitting in their living room in 6 different California wine regions, and the audience can be wherever they are. And it's in a lot of ways really efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also evens the playing field, I feel, because use Tablas Creek or a winery around the corner who might have 3 times the budget. We're basically now all the same on the small screen, and we're all basically able to connect, and then it just comes to the audience and how you connect with the audience and how you present yourself too, because I think people are pretty savvy and they know whether or not you're genuine or not. I mean, if you're full of it, they're probably tuning you out.
For sure. Okay, so how do you feel like you've been doing this now in Paso for almost 20 years? How do you feel like the kind of perception of Paso in the broader marketplace has evolved in those 20 years?
God, what a great question. We have evolved in such a way that it's almost like it's exactly where you kind of wanted to go if you look back 20 years ago. Because at that time, when I first took this position, I'm sorry, but Paso was perceived as this hot region that made high alcohol, high octane, unbalanced wines that was kind of treated as oh, you're number 4 or 5 region that I want to visit. Wine country in California is Napa. And I feel like if you fast forward to today, when you say wine country in California, you don't, and this could be anywhere in the United States or to a certain extent internationally, you don't instantly think Napa. Now you question wine country in Paso where? Or I'm sorry, California where? Because now Paso is here, but then also Santa Barbara and Monterey have also come a long way. And now I feel that the perception of our wines are definitely seen as something to really actually take notice to. We've had amazing scores, we've had amazing write-ups, we've had a lot of great recognition. When we got the Wine Region of the Year award from Wine Enthusiast magazine, that was also another one of those leveling up instances where it's like, yes, on the world stage, we are something. We are here and we are making amazing wines that can be recognized on the world stage. And so that's kind of where I've seen and how I've seen us grow. I mean, obviously we've grown in numbers and we've grown in vineyard acres and so many ways, but technology has also come a long way, and vines have grown and aged in a way that we've been able to take advantage of that too. So many wineries are making such elegant and wonderful wines.
I think people forget just how young most California wine regions are. I mean, even you look at Napa, really, yes, you can find those pre-Prohibition vineyards, and there's little pockets of that history that are left. But it started in the 1960s and late 60s, and it really didn't kind of become what people think of it as today until the 80s. And Paso, we have vines that are 100 plus years old here, but really the Paso wine region didn't get started until the 70s, and it didn't start to really become kind of reflect the diversity that it has now in terms of the different varieties, in terms of the investments from outside until the 2000s. I mean, it's a young region. And just the fact that it's probably been 5 years since I've said that we're in Paso Robles and had someone look at me and say, oh, what part of Napa is that in? Like, that's progress.
Or Texas, right? Yeah. Yeah, it is progress. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to actually have the ability for tradespeople, especially, to actually, give you the time of day in a sense too. I know that that's so much of our programming when we try so hard to be able to get out into market and try to help open some doors for our wineries when we're out there on the road. And it's so different than it was even 10 years ago, where we would go and we would do our trade events, and it would feel like there's, maybe 10% of the room was actually influential. And these days, I mean, I'm not going to say it's 50% of the room by any means, but we've definitely grown to have a lot of good quality people actually now interested in coming to one of our events.
It's interesting that in some ways, I feel like the trade maybe lags behind media and consumers in this. Mm-hmm. I remember, and this was a long time ago. This was early. This was like 03 or 04 maybe. A group of wineries out here decided to get together and go and do an event at a wine shop down in Orange County. And like, I mean, there's some pretty high profile wineries. It was Justin Saxum came down to do it. It was us. It was Adelaida. Anyway, whatever. It was sort of the higher profile wineries in that early 2000 range out in kind of the hills west, Adelaida Hills out here. And like the wine shop was super surprised by the response that they got from their customers. And like they had to bring in more chairs, and like we absolutely filled the place. It was like 120 people there. Nice. And the wine shop owner said, like, man, this is more people than we've gotten for any event that we've hosted ever before. Like, how many of you are regular visitors to Paso Robles? And every hand in the audience went up. And the owner was like, oh man, I haven't been in like 6 or 8 years. Clearly I'm falling behind my customers. Like, and I feel like that happens maybe less than it used to, but I still feel like maybe there are ideas of what Paso is and isn't in the trade that are a few years behind what writers and what the consumers who actually visit are thinking.
Oh, that's very, very, very true. We came up with that, you were a part of this, that even cooler than you think kind of tag to try to help, I guess, uncover the fact that we are not this region that's just warm all the through. That's the part of this technology we haven't figured out yet. Got to get that one licked. So trying to come up with this idea of how do we really inform the trade better as to what truly makes us who we are in this whole cool down thing. And so we created that whole even cooler than you think to talk about Templeton Gap, talk about Pacific Ocean and all that. And actually, honestly, that's been one of those things that resonates so well with trade because then I think they're able to wrap their head around this region in a new and different way.
Yeah. And I know that's one of the things that people are always surprised when I tell them is that our average temperature is cooler than the average temperature at Beaucastel. Like people think of France as being cooler than Paso, and it's just not the case. I mean, the days are a little bit warmer here, but the nights are so much colder that the average temperature is lower. We pick the same grapes on average a week to 10 days later than they do at Beaucastel at the same sugars and with higher acids. Like, I mean, that's a kind of an eye-opening thing, I think, for people who think they know what Paso is like.
I was reading something about Cab Franc because I was working with the Cab Collective on a presentation recently, and I was reading about the Loire and how they're, in general, ever so slightly cooler than us over the long term, not necessarily in the short term on the spikes. But it was interesting in that our relationship with the ocean is so much closer than theirs. Theirs is, by comparison, it would be like from us to Monterey versus as the crow flies 25 miles or so from center of town. And yet, they're perceived in such a different way, being cooler than us. And I don't know, it was an interesting little exercise I went through, and I was talking about Cab Franc but then yet we still had the same soils and all of that. So that was part of it actually. So, but it was interesting because I saw a lot of nodding heads from the trade and okay. When you make those old world connections, there's definitely little lights and sparks that happen outside of those heads.
Yeah, there were a few comments that came through that I think were worth highlighting. There's one from Mark Martinez said that Rhone Rangers and Hospice du Rhone have helped a lot with Paso awareness, and I think that's absolutely true. Having Hospice du Rhone located here for the last 2 decades has been amazing in bringing really high quality trade and media and producers from all over the world to Paso. I think that's been amazing.
Absolutely. And selfishly for us as a region though too, we can't all always go and travel. We're not, we're not always out there. And so being able to connect with those producers from out of country when they come here and being able to taste their wines, hear their stories, and in a sense, compare our wines to theirs, it's very educational, even for us as a region. And I think if anything, it's almost professional development for our winemakers and our people to understand those wines as well.
I mean, I always, whenever it's happening, I kind of pinch myself and I'm like, is this really happening in my town? Like, do I just get to roll out of bed and like, I could bike there and I don't know if I could bike home, but it's super cool that is here. And then a couple of the other comments, the cooler than you think, the thing that I like about it is the parentheses around even, like even cooler than you think. Like that was fun. That was fun to get to see come to fruition.
Yeah.
And then finally, one question from Justin Good saying, hoping Paso doesn't follow the Napa trajectory. It's nice to see lots of family-owned independent wineries in the region. One of the things that I think is really exciting about the way that Paso is kind of developed in the last few years is that you've seen a lot of generational handovers. Mm-hmm. So you've got not just what we're doing here at Tablas, but you think of what's going on at like Peachy Canyon or what's going on at Hope Family, where you really have the next generation already kind of spreading their wings and doing what they do. And it seems like it's often in those kind of failed generational handovers that a wine brand gets bought up and becomes part of a corporate something. And I feel like that's one of the most interesting kind of narrative threads in what's going on in Paso right now is the fact that you do have a lot of those like second generation kind of evolutions of some of the high profile wineries here.
Yeah, definitely. I know that you mentioned Peachy, and seeing that, how the Beckett brothers are now taking that family brand that's one of the very first of our region, and really, picking up that ball and running with it now, is pretty cool to see how they're able now to not necessarily reinvent, but repackage and refresh
Yeah.
a brand that's been around for so long, and with such focus too. I mean, they had so much success with Chronic, but with such focus. I think a lot of that, um, this Napa kind of Napazation or whatever. I mean, Napa, we love Napa. We love going up there. It's fun. St. Helena is like the coolest little town, all that. But I think the difference between where we sit and where, say, Napa is access. We're a ways away from any major
Right.
city. So when you're here, you're here. And so, as let's just say, if you're in the business, you're not day tripping up. You're not checking in on something. You're not just kind of hopping over and hopping back. You're really here. And I think that's a commonality amongst everybody. When you're come to Paso and you establish a winery, a business, or you want to be an aspiring winemaker or whatever it might be, you're kind of all in, because you're not in and out of here. This is it. You're home. Our
And you
kids
probably
are,
live here. I mean, that's
yeah,
the other thing, is that generally the wineries, the winery owners live in Paso, which
that's
is
right.
different than Santa Barbara, where a lot of the owners live in LA, or at the very least down in Santa Barbara City rather than up in wine country. And when you talk about Napa and Sonoma, you have a lot of people who live in the Bay. I mean, in San Francisco or in Berkeley, but um, their vineyard is an hour away.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be an hour away. That's like an LA commute to go 20 miles,
Cool. Awesome. I could talk to you all day, but it has been half an hour.
Wow.
So it flew by, as it always does. So before we go, do you want to tell people how? You've already told them about the Zoom Hangouts, and about the podcast. Is there any other things you want to point people to about how to learn what's going on in Paso and what the Wine Alliance is doing?
Absolutely. Definitely go to pasowine.com. That's where you're going to find all the information. Once again, I mean, the Wine Alliance is the official trade organization of the Paso Robles American Viticultural Area. And so you're going to find not only a lot of consumer-facing stuff there that will help you identify wineries to go to, events to go to, all that kind of stuff, but you're also going to find a lot of good trade stuff. You check out the media kit, learn more about Paso through our AVAs and everything. Reach out to me. My email address is on pasowine.com. You can't miss it. And say hello. Tune into the Paso Wine Hour every Thursday at 3:00. This week, we're talking about the El Pomar district. And then check out the Where Wine Takes You podcast for sure. All of that stuff, you can find it on pasowine.com. And then follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at Paso Wine on Instagram, since we're here on Instagram.
Awesome.
So thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. This was super fun. So let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Cool.
See ya.
Thanks. And thanks, everybody. Those of you who are regulars here on the Tablas Instagram Live, come back in 2 weeks. I'm super excited. I'll have Eric Asimov from the New York Times joining me. So that's really exciting for me. So anyway, have a good couple of weeks. And if you're getting your wine club shipments, enjoy. And I'll see you soon.